Welcome back, everyone. You are here for yet another fantastic run here at Indiethon Spring 2024. I have with me Silver running Vividlope. Silver, take it away.
Hi, so I'm Silver, MHFsilver, I just go by Silver, and I'm joined today with my commentator Maylo, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Maylo. I'll hopefully be able to provide commentary for Silver's run here.
So we wanted to get a bit of an introduction out before we started the run, just because at the very get-go there's quite a bit to explain immediately. But with that, I think we're good to go. So countdown, so we'll start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And at the start we get a cutscene that we can't skip, but one of the first things that's going to happen once I get control is we're going to enable what's called short mode. The game typically requires you to complete 12 levels per world. Short mode will change that to 5, and all I have to do is hold left here. Then once this is active, I'm going to hold right and just jump over the trigger to interact with that character there. And now where you begin the actual run itself. So that's why I needed introductions pretty early on, is just that first bit requires quite a bit of explanation. Alright, so if you want to take it away, Maylo, while I start going.
I'd be glad to. So, Vividlope is a puzzle action video game where you try to mark tiles, get some fruits, hopefully dispatch some enemies, and clear levels. So, as Silver said, we'll be playing on short mode, and the goal of all these stages will be to get to the target percentage in the top left. Once that's completed, we will enter the bonus phase. Normally, you would want to try and get 100% there, but in all runs of this game, we try to avoid doing that. So the second Silver gets to bonus phase, he will simply bottom out his power and complete the stage as normal. Speaking of power, that's what we use to increase our speed. On the left, we can see the power bar. That's going to have a couple lines there, 2 and 3. That just corresponds to how fast you can go. Every time a level starts, at least for now, Silver's going to be using a max power item, and that just maximizes our power, so we don't have to worry about that whatsoever. We can always be at full speed no matter what.
Yeah, because naturally your speed will build up as you go over tiles, but the max speed item will just immediately max us out, which will then put us at our maximum speed that we're able to go through. The character I'm playing as, Cerise, her max speed is a little bit slower than the other character I can be playing as. However, the downside to the other character is when we get to levels that are a bit more complex in this category, he ends up being a little bit slower because we have to cross over tiles we've already painted in, and the other character loses a lot of speed if he covers ground that you've already done. So Cerise just ends up being faster because her max speed doesn't tank as much.
Yeah, for right now, that's not going to be as much of a factor, but as we continue on, you'll see what Silver means by that.
And then every world will start with this little cutscene, and we're just going to skip it. And then one thing that you might have noticed at the start of every level, there's like this little stage introduction sequence that's normally supposed to do like a pan over of the world, kind of like how you would see in like Super Monkey Ball. But if I mash the retry button, I can actually skip that whole introduction sequence, and it's a little bit faster than normally. What you'd want to do is just hold the jump button, and that'll like speed through it, but mashing the retry button skips it a whole lot faster.
So speaking of items, we've got a couple at our disposal. Right now, we've only got 3. We'll be using these a fair bit right now, but as the run continues, we'll be getting better, more useful items. So for right now, Silver's gonna be really using max power, using impact, and then just filling out the stage with impact as best as possible.
Yeah, this level specifically is a really good example of how useful impact is. Impact lets us jump and land in a 3x3 grid, and then it'll cover in those tiles. In early levels like this is very useful because of how effective it is at covering all this ground. Later in the game, during later worlds, it's not as useful as some of the other ones we'll get that'll cover the same exact amount of ground. But right now, it's still very useful for what it does. And then this level is also a good showcase of how useful impact is. So we just get to jump ahead and just follow this exact line. I'm going to trigger these enemies a little bit before I advance, and the reason is these guys can just destroy me, so I want to try and avoid doing that. And then we can just go through. We'll pick up another one here. This level is definitely designed for impact. Now, the items I'm having access to, this is done just by pressing the select button or whatever you have bound as your select key. And that'll give you access to the items you have available at the world you're at. The amount of items I have is all 99 when I start a run, and the reason that's the case is this game uses items that are shared across all save files on your system. So every save on my computer has access to the same items, and so what I do is between runs, I just go and stock up items on a different save. And then I just make sure I start every run with a max of 99 of everything. And now here's the first introduction of what we call undo tiles, where if we backtrack over tiles we've already colored in, they will go back to whatever previous color they were. There's an item we can use to stop that, and that's called the Good Shoes, and that's what I have equipped. So that'll be another one that saves a lot of time in this, is just using that. And that's one of the main things that the other character sort of struggles with, is anything that we have to backtrack and go through tiles like that, that's where they lose speed. But thanks to the Good Shoes, we can avoid having to worry about the undo tiles actually taking effect. Now, when we go into this world, we have access to one new item called the Dash, and that allows us to just go super fast in a single direction, which you would think probably makes it the best item in the game, because it allows us to go fast. Not so much. It is, while it's very useful for going in straight lines and does provide a bit of damage, as you see I went through an enemy and killed him instantly, it ends up not actually being the best item for going fast, because once we get later into the game, there's going to be items that, while aren't going to give us speed themselves, they cover so much more ground than this item does.
Yeah, so Dash is good at the moment, but like Silver said, it will be outclassed. Something Silver did not mention, though, was that it does have a small amount of iframes, so if you are quick on the draw, you are able to basically take your invulnerability and go through anything you want, and nothing can really stop you.
And that will come into play in a later level. The later level, we really abuse that. But yeah, it'll give us some slight invulnerability and allow us to deal damage, and then allows us to just go in straight lines. So it's very good for right now filling in all this space, but later, yeah, it gets pretty outclassed by a lot of the items late game.
Speaking of one of those items, one of the items that Silver should pick up in this stage specifically is going to be something called wrap paper. What wrap paper does is it allows you to mark a bunch of tiles, as you can probably see. And by holding down the item button, you can actually strafe with the wrap paper. And that's what we're going to be using a lot of later down the line. But as of right now, we cannot use it freely. Thankfully, this is one of the few stages we do go by that does have wrap paper on its own.
Yeah, so the worlds, as I mentioned earlier, unlock what items you can use. The wrap paper, which is probably one of the best items in the game itself, opens at World 6. So from World 6 onward, you'll see quite a bit of it, as it is one of our most effective tools for covering ground. Right now, I just got to be a little bit more careful. There is a little trick I can do to save some time, where if you use these little boost pads to go back over tiles you've already filled in, it'll actually end the bonus phase a lot faster, like that.
Oh yeah, someone in chat does have a point. So, we are playing this run on easy mode specifically. There are two difficulty settings in this game. There's easy and there's hard mode. What we're playing right now is easy, as you can see. But hard mode speeds up some enemies, changes up some tile formation, so we'll be worrying about that later, but for right now, everything's going to be pretty straightforward, and yeah, it's just a lot harder.
Yeah, the hard mode is what the game launched with as default, and the easy mode was added when there were a couple complaints about how enemy spawns were sort of obnoxious. So I think arguably it shouldn't be called easy, it should probably just be called like normal mode, but that's just my opinion. And then here we get access to another item, but we don't care for it because it's not very useful. And here we see the introduction of invisible tiles. And these tiles work where they are only visible to us if we get close enough to where they show up. So we can uncover them as we get near them. Just going to spam dash a bit more. A lot of figuring out the routing and stuff for these levels is figuring out which levels don't have higher requirements for clearing, and then what good pathing through the levels are like, and effective use of the items in said level. That is where most of the routing for this comes in, and this is a good example of that, where effective play through this level is also very good. So we're going to uncover a bunch of the tiles here, and then I can just go along the edge of the map. And we can just keep going to all the corners, and then when we finish up that, we just end back in front of tiles we've already cleared, so we can just end the bonus phase really quickly. With the bonus phase, we want to always try and walk diagonally through the tiles we've already colored in, and the reason being is that you travel diagonally faster than you travel just in a straight line, so it's faster to always try and walk back over tiles diagonally when you're in the bonus phase.
So, speaking of diagonals, something you might see Silver do occasionally is walk between two tiles. That does technically double our paint, so we do that sometimes in the run. It's not really that utilized in items specifically. That's more something that we do in item lists.
Yeah, you can sort of jiggle between two tiles at the same time. It's a little bit faster than like just trying to walk in straight lines. But yeah, in the items category, we end up we don't really use it too much other than the early game, just because of how like items just become the best way to cover any sort of ground late game, that there's no real need to worry about the benefits of jiggling across the tiles like that.
Yeah, and since it's difficult to do, it tends to just make you lose time in an items run.
And then here's the only time I ever use this item, and it's not the best item in the game. I wish this one we could strafe with, like the rat paper. I think that would make it a whole lot more useful. But it basically, what it does is it just throws a bunch of paint in a direction that you're holding, and then it just sort of lands wherever it feels like landing, which isn't very effective most of the time that we use it, so it ultimately gets shelved and isn't used for a whole lot. And this is one of the levels that is the most obnoxious for me. Routing through this one has been a pain.
Yeah, so like Silver said, there is a bit of a meaning to where the paint balloon will go. It just tries to track onto enemies, and since we're trying to paint tiles fast, that is not very useful for us.
Yeah, if we could make it, if it could work like rat paper where we can strafe and spam it, it'd be a little bit more effective, but as it stands, yeah, the way it functions, it just doesn't do exactly what we'd like it to do, so it doesn't get utilized as much. And here we get to see a bit more usage of rat paper strafing and how good it is. And then another thing that the rat paper is very useful with is if enemies come into contact with us while we're throwing a rat paper, even if like they're coming at us from the side, the rat paper will actually kill the enemy for us. And now we have access to the stamp, which is just a much better version of the impact. And the reason being is while this also does a 3x3, there are going to be levels where we have, like this, where you have to walk over tiles multiple times to fill them in, the color that you need them to be. Impact will only flip the tiles once, where the stamp will do it, will set it to whatever color it needs to be. So this item single-handedly is what makes the wrap paper not very useful, or the impact not very useful after we get this.
No. So, remember how we mentioned difficulty a little while ago? If we were playing on hard mode, we would have to deal with this a little sooner. So that's another reason why we play on easy mode. We don't want to deal with having to step on tiles twice in a row. That's just slower in general.
Yep. In an ideal world, every time I enter the bonus phase, I will already be over tiles that have already been filled in. And then this level is one of the most obnoxious ones. This also contains undo tiles, and there's a lot of enemies that'll spawn, and then these insta-kill tiles that are right next to me.
We have been trying to chip away at this for a long time. If Silver would like to explain what he likes to do for this level specifically.
Yeah, so what I try to aim for is, now I try to go specifically for these tops that have these paint rollers. I didn't mention earlier, but the paint rollers will just paint in a straight line and just set whatever color in front of you to whatever color you need it to be. So I try to beeline for the paint rollers at the start, and then just sort of work around whatever they do. And then this level is the example of where the iframes from the dash come into play, because here's where we're going to just spam it a bunch, and because the iframes, we can avoid taking damage from some of these enemies. They're just going to be constantly shooting at us.
Yeah, this is one of the better stages for dash specifically, just because we don't quite have wrap paper yet. So this is the best we can work with.
And then you'll notice I also just went in constant diagonals. That's just to cover more ground. And then now we're going to enter World 6, which means we get wrap paper at our disposal. And you'll get to really see how beneficial it is and how pretty broken it is.
So once items and item lists are usually not that far apart, but once we get to World 6, yeah, the gap starts to really just widen in terms of time. And that's not even our most powerful item yet.
So this looks exactly like that previous level I just did, except now I have wrap paper to just paint in straight lines for me. So instead of having to rely on those paint rollers to paint those straight lines and then I have to work off of them, now I can just paint straight lines myself.
And as you can see, that was much faster than relying on paint rollers and stamp.
Yeah, anything that we can do where it's a straight line, that's where the wrap paper shines. This is an example of wall that I just said that. I'm still going to use dash, just because of how long of a straightaway this all is, that the dash just ends up still being better. And while this level does have undos, we don't really care, because we can just walk around the one tile that we have to worry about. So it's not a big deal. I don't have to use the good shoes. And then this is another level where the wrap paper strafing and how effective it is really comes into play. There are some enemies that'll just spawn out of nowhere once we go over certain tiles. Because I'm just spamming the wrap paper, it'll kill those enemies as I get near them, or they spawn. Oop. And then we can just get up here. And then we use more wrap paper and the paint rollers to finish the level. And then we get another level where it's just a bunch of straightaways that the wrap paper is once again perfect for. And then we get some ice physics, which we avoided earlier, You didn't get to see any of that, but now you do. And they're not the greatest, but also they help the rat paper. The rat paper also follows the ice physics, which helps us quite a bit right there.
Yeah, so for some reason, whenever you're on an ice tile, rat paper strafing does not work like it normally does. And sometimes it helps us, other times it kind of doesn't. But in that stage specifically, it helps us a lot.
Yeah, because then it means I can just spam rat paper and they will just go all over the place and then just so happen to fill in the tiles, even if they aren't in a straight line when I throw them. And then for a good bit, up until we start the next world, a lot of what's going to be happening is just rat paper strafing through every level. Because now that is our most effective way of filling in tiles at this time. So we just use that. And then here we get introduced to these tiles, which will break if you step over them. And we just use that to get down here to this path below. And then this level introduces a little laser that will kill us if we come into contact with it. We'll see that when I get up here a little bit more. Yeah, so wherever this laser is facing, I have to then work around that, and that's how I decide which path I go when I get to this point. Because if it's trying to go to like the left-hand side here, I want to avoid getting caught by it. So I will start on the right-hand side, and then if it's going the other way, of course, I switch based on wherever it's going. It may look like it's easy to jump over, but it's actually a pain. And then this is where we're going to abuse a mechanic of the game that I haven't shown yet. This level is normally a forced item called the super jump, but we can use the item called the bomb, which is supposed to clear all enemies and give you invincibility for a short period of time. We can use that to walk over all of these insta-death tiles, and that will then make it to where we don't have to use the super jump, which is slow and doesn't paint for us, and instead we get to use the rat paper, which is a lot more effective. So we just get to use the bomb to give us iframes to then walk over the tiles, and then just use the rat paper to fill in the level.
Yeah, and that's another good thing about items. Stages like this are much quicker, because in an itemless run you would have to be painting these all with your feet, and that's cool and all, but rat paper's cooler.
Yeah, and then it's one of those, there's another level that we skipped earlier that forces super jump on you. It's one of the few instances where items are forced onto you, but thankfully we don't have to abide by that.
Once again, thanks to short mode, we can just choose whichever levels we don't like and then just cherry pick them and then go from there.
Yeah, currently we only do categories through the short mode just because of how much better it makes the runs in general. Plus it just overall makes it a whole lot faster. At the time, the earliest runs that didn't use short mode were like 2.5 hours long. And so now, if you see my estimate of 40 minutes, you see how much time short mode saves over everything.
So here we're coming across level 8, and level 8's where we're going to get something very special, and I'm sure Silver would love to talk about it.
Yeah, so here we get arguably the most busted item in the game, and that is the paint bucket. And the paint bucket just creates a star pattern for us and fills in the tiles, and then if a tile requires being changed twice, like this level, it'll change it to whatever color it needs to be. So from this point on, the run is basically just rat paper and paint buckets, and you get to see a lot more effective use of that here and how much ground it covers. So this level has these little light bulbs. The way that this mechanic works is the light bulbs will flip whatever color tiles that they're around, and we don't have to worry about that because we can just walk over and just start spamming our paint buckets.
The funny thing is, any other item would actually toggle those light bulbs, but because of how Paint Bucket works, we don't have to worry about that whatsoever.
Yeah, all the items in the game usually will interact with the environment to create the paint. The paint bucket itself just places it down. So it's one of the few items that doesn't actually interact with the level itself.
The downside to that is that it does not dispatch enemies, so in some cases we might still be using wrap paper, and that's why this run doesn't just become paint bucket spam.
Yeah, it is still useful, and you may end up seeing me later in the later levels where I will use the bomb a bit more to dispatch enemies as well, just because there are some enemies later in the game that get really fast and really obnoxious. And then, so yeah, after we get the paint bucket, a lot of the level routing just becomes which areas we can use the paint bucket to cover the most amount of ground with. And then here, we've seen it a little bit, these little landmines that are beeping. We want to avoid triggering any of these because Cerise will slow down if you're within their trigger range. She will slow down. We want to avoid that, obviously. So I try to walk around them. And then didn't effectively do it there, but you get the point.
Yeah, that's the game's pinch mode in action. It tries to stop you from just running into things you didn't see coming, but in the case of a speedrun, we actually want to avoid that as much as possible. Like Silver said, and landmines just happen to trigger all the time.
Yeah, it'll happen if you're at low power and about to walk over something that'll kill you. It'll come into play. It does it against certain enemies, and then it does it over landmines. And then now this is an example of where normally you would think we would use the paint bucket because it's just a giant square. We are going to use a combination of paint bucket and wrap paper strafing. Just because of the layout of the level, it makes it a little bit faster to do it this way. So we filled in half of the square with the wrap paper, and then we just fill in the other half with the paint buckets.
Yeah, and this just cuts down on how much we have to be walking around the stage. We don't have to ever go to the top half of it.
And then this is one of the ones, this was one of the earliest levels I routed like effective paint buckets in. Just figuring out like where are good spots to stand and use the paint bucket to get the most use out of it. So once we realized like how good the paint bucket actually was, this was like one of the earliest levels I looked at, just because this level isn't exactly fun normally. And then here, it's a late game level that is actually useful for wrap paper. So we go back to wrap paper, and for a bit, this level isn't actually very useful for the paint buckets. And then we will strafe some more around this. And once we fill it in, I go forward a bit and then continue to strafe. It's very difficult to explain effective wrap paper strafing, because basically you want to try and avoid ending your chain. If you are wrap paper strafing, and whatever direction you were holding to strafe in, whenever that last wrap paper gets used, Cerise will then just immediately turn and face that direction. So what you want to do effectively is try and make it to where you don't have that period where there's a downtime between wrap paper usage. And so to do that, I've developed a sort of claw hand that I use for strafing. And it's not the greatest looking, but if anyone in the chat has played Monster Hunter on the PSP, you'll know what kind of claw grip you gotta have for that. And then this level is just a giant flat square, so we get to just spam, and now you get to actually see how much ground this will actually fill in. And then as we fill in certain tiles, you're going to see these squares that are lighting up. That's just a shooting star that's going to fall and just destroy those parts of the level. We want to avoid getting hit by those. And then now we enter the final world of the game. and we're going to do a similar skip to what I did at the beginning, where I skipped over a force interaction. There's another one just before the final world. Thankfully, if I didn't mess it up, it's only a single text box, so it's not too big of a deal if I miss it. And I got it, so.
Good job.
And then the final... Okay, yeah, you go ahead and explain the differences in the final world.
Alright, so the final world plays a little differently compared to what we've been playing up to so far. Before, we had to worry about making sure we could keep our power up by starting at 0 and trying to just mark a certain percentage. That's all thrown out the window. We start at full power. If that power reaches 0, we lose a life, and from here on, all stages require 100% tile completion. That does mean we don't have to worry about bonus phase anymore, thankfully. But that is something to keep in mind. If we miss even one tile, we have to go back around and look for it through the entire stage, and that can lose some time.
Yeah, and then you may also notice I'm no longer doing that sort of like intro sequence skip that I was doing. And that's because the final world is treated differently, where if I do that retry, it actually resets the entire world. And that's just because this whole world is supposed to be one, like, giant gauntlet. And so if I do that same sort of retry trick, it'll actually make me retry the whole world instead of just skipping that intro sequence. So instead, I just hold the jump button to speed up that sequence instead, like you would normally do.
Yeah, and for the most part, for right now, we're just going to be using wrap paper on these stages. Later down the line, we will be using Paint Bucket, but since we want to actually try and conserve our Paint Bucket usages, that's why we're using wrap paper right now.
Yeah, we're going to be switching between using the two of them, and it's just, yeah, we're trying to conserve it because the very last level is a giant square, so we want to have as much for that. This is one of the, in my opinion, this level is very obnoxious. Not difficult, not like terrible, but I just hate the layout of this level, and it costs me a lot of time in a lot of my early runs, because it has a combination of so many of the factors in the game, like invisible tiles, enemies all over the place, and then the final section of the level is right where a bunch of enemies are just circling each other, so it's also very dangerous. But we're just gonna make circles around here.
Yeah, that very center of the stage is very dangerous. We want to be ready for that.
And if you didn't keep the shield, like I didn't at the start there, one thing you can do is you can, right before you jump, get on the little jump panel, you can use the bomb, and that'll give you the invincibility frames to survive anything that's happening there. So if they get a really bad cycle and those guys are right there when you land, as long as you use the bomb before you landed, you can save yourself from taking damage. And then this level we also see some of the most obnoxious enemies in the game, in my opinion, and it's those giant dragons. They just fly everywhere they want and can just snipe us. So anytime I see them, I try to just immediately use a bomb to get rid of them, because I don't want to deal with them. And so now we're on the second to last level. I almost instinctively did a reset, which would have been very bad. And this is where we get to see an enemy that I absolutely despise, and it's these little tack-looking guys. And that's because when you break them, they turn into a smaller one that moves a whole lot faster. And so I want to try and make sure that these guys are gone and disposed of, to where I'll even use just a bomb to make sure I don't have to worry about them. Because you have to use 2 wrap papers to get rid of them, and that's not very useful when we want to make sure we're covering ground.
Yeah,
Right.
So we haven't been talking about enemies too much, since on easy there aren't as much of a threat, but like Silver said, we worry about Dracos, we worry about Blibs, and I don't think we encounter frogs that much in the run, so we don't really worry about them.
Yep, and then we're coming up on time here, so get ready for that once we fill in this final bit. Oh, looks like I missed a tile somewhere. Oh, there we go. And time. And that's Vividlope.
Congratulations. I swear I blinked and missed most of that run. It went by so fast.
Yeah, I think my estimate is pretty generous. And I just do it because absolute worst case scenario, I may have to redo the final world if it goes terribly. But the nice thing about the final world is, and we haven't really talked about it because I haven't died enough to bring it up, you only have a certain amount of lives. But in the final world, if you complete a level in the final world, you gain a life. So you can, if you can avoid losing, you can continue to build up lives as you go through the final world. But I gave myself a generous estimate in the worst case scenario that for whatever reason, I just beef it so hard I have to redo the final world.
Yeah, the final world before we all got really good at running this was honestly a bit of a run ender.
Yeah, because it's, at the time, it was like a, before we were really good at it, it was like a 9-minute gauntlet where if you failed it, it was basically just run over because there was no way you were going to save time on a 9-minute gauntlet like that.
Oof, yeah.
And then our community goes by in-game time, which the game displays afterwards. So I'm just going to skip this cutscene. So 33:49, not too bad. My record is 32:24, so about a minute and a half slower, but not terrible. Definitely could have played better, not died as much. But yeah, that is a showcase of what the items category looks like. We do have an item list where we don't use that menu to cheese through a bunch of the levels. But yeah, so that's Vividlope.
Excellent.
I guess,
And go ahead.
no, sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, if anyone watching wants to try this game out for themselves, try out the speedrun, where can they go and find resources to learn all these
So
crazy levels?
if you go to speedrun.com and search up Vividlope, we have our page there, which will link our Discord. And then I also have a guide that I made up on there that explains what to do on every level, as well as a tutorial for all of the skips and tricks that we do. So you can do that. You can hang out with us in the Discord. Even the developer of the game's in our Discord with us. They've been very helpful in helping us patch a lot of things that have in the past have crashed runs, where if we spammed too many items and levels that had multiple effects, it used to crash the game. Thankfully, they were very quick on fixing a lot of those problems for us.
Magnificent. It's always nice when a developer embraces and supports the speedrunning scene.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. It was my indie game of last year, so I definitely recommend it. It is definitely worth the money. And then it's currently only on PC, but is coming to Switch at some point in the near future. So definitely something to look out for.
As of right now, that is Q2 2024.
So very soon, then that's the next few months. Awesome.
Yeah.
Where can people come and find you?
So
If they
my
want to check out
Twitch
your
is
stuff.
I'm at twitch.tv/MHFsilver. I'm streaming a bunch of random stuff at this point. And then my Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it is MHFsilver_, just because my original account got deleted. And then I have a YouTube channel. I have multiple YouTube channels. So if you just type youtube.com/@MHFsilver, you get a one that's a bunch of stuff. If you add the underscore to that, you get all my speedruns. So
Fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for that run. It was a lot of fun to watch. Everyone in chat seemed to be really vibing with it.
yeah, it is. It's a good game. I appreciate the opportunity. I haven't actually been a part of a marathon in like 4 years, so.
Well, awesome to have you here, and there's always a place for you if you want to run this or anything else in the future.
Thank you so much.
Lovely. Well, that is going to bring us to the end of my hosting shift and my time here at Indiethon Spring 2024. Just a reminder, if you guys want to get some donations in these last couple of runs, we are raising money for Fred Hutch Cancer Research Centre. Donate to support their amazing efforts by going to www.tracker.indiethon.com/donate in your favourite web browser. Just maybe open up a new tab for that so you don't miss out anything that's happening on stream. Right now, though, we are going to head to another intermission. I'm going to hand over the hosting reins to the fantastic Boo to carry us through these last couple of runs towards the end of the marathon. I do hope you'll all stick around, keep watching, keep supporting, because without you guys, we wouldn't have an event. But do stick around, because these last couple of runs are sure to be fantastic. Thank you all, and see you all next run.